Welcome to today's Asia Society event, Disruptive Asia, Tech Innovations for a Food-Secure Asia in partnership with H&H Group. My name is Jessie Broadway and I'm Global Sustainability Manager at H&H Group. Before we begin, we acknowledge that many participants in today's event are dialing in from locations that have traditional owners and custodians. I'm currently on Jara country, traditional lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge all traditional owners and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to welcome and acknowledge any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people joining our webcast today. H&H Group is delighted to be partnering with Asia Society to deliver today's important event, bringing Asia Society's Disruptive Asia publication to life and exploring the role of AgTech in addressing food insecurity across our shared region. The expanded version of H&H is Health and Happiness, which reflects our mission to make people healthier and happier. This mission comes to life through premium food, supplement and care products across 7 different brands focused on baby and adult nutrition and care. Given these categories, as an organisation, we simply cannot be sustainable without acknowledging the challenges we face in our global food systems. We have 3 sustainability goals at H&H, each aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals: advancing the story of good health, reducing our footprint on the planet, and honouring human rights and fairness. All 3 of these goals both impact and are impacted by the challenges facing our food systems. Given these social and environmental challenges that are already facing us in 2020 and the increased risks of further threats in the future, the importance of these goals has been starkly brought into focus. We are committed to using the business as a force for good and formalising this through B Corp certification across the group by 2025. We strongly believe that meaningful progress cannot be achieved alone, and our plans rely on partnerships, the 17th goal of the UN SDGs. Partnerships with suppliers to build resilient and ethical value chains that nourish our natural resources and the people along the way. Partnerships with researchers and not-for-profits that guide social and environmental decision-making and support the communities that need it. And partnerships with industry groups and associations like these to collectively change our path to a more prosperous future. That's why we value partnerships like this one with Asia Society that bring organisations and the power of people together to pollinate ideas. Today's event will run for around 45 minutes, with 25 minutes for our panel discussion and 15 minutes for audience Q&A. So please do submit a question in the YouTube live chat box. It is my pleasure to now introduce our expert panel for today. Joining us all the way from San Francisco is Dr. Jaleh Daie, Chairman and Founder of Ag Food Tech, Women in Tech Hall of Famer. Jaleh is a venture capitalist, strategic advisor and board director across many portfolios within the ag and food sectors. From Guangzhou, we are joined by Justin Gong, co-founder of XAG, a world-leading ag tech company and drone manufacturer serving both scaled and small farm holders. Justin was also named one of Forbes China 30 Under 30 in 2018. Lastly, I'm pleased to welcome Rob Hulme, dialing in from Singapore today. Rob is the Asia Director of Beanstalk AgTech, working with innovators, agribusiness corporates, investors and government agencies across Asia Pacific. I'll now hand over to Asia Society's Executive Director and Curator of the Disruptive Asia Sustainability Series, Thomas Soem, to moderate the conversation. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Jessie, for that great introduction and welcome, and also to Justin Howden at the H&H Group for partnering with us today on this very important discussion. We are very proud to count you as one of our corporate members and partners, and I'd like to acknowledge the significant leadership on sustainability and contribution to food and nutrition security of H&H Group. I also like to acknowledge all traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Let's go into our discussion. Jaleh, Rob and Justin, very good to see you all, and a very warm welcome also from me. Let me start with a question that came from our co-host, Jessie, and I might put this to you, Justin. With the ambitious goal of zero hunger by 2030, the challenges we are facing in terms of topsoil and land degradation, how can technology help grow the increasing food needs of the future?
Okay, thank you, Thomas. I'm very delighted to join this web seminar today. Yes, so this question is very general. I think smart agriculture is the future. Everyone believes that. But how? How can we make sure smart agriculture can be accessed by all the farmers around the world, so we can build this zero hunger, meet the zero hunger goal? So I think first we should understand what is smart agriculture. I think we are in the transition period from agriculture 3.0 to agriculture 4.0, which means we are building digital farming networks. We are developing smart agriculture tools, precision agriculture methods. We are also trying to utilize all the technologies available like AI, deep learning, to help farmers make better decisions and use less resources. And all these three aspects together, we are building a smart agriculture ecosystem. So this is the big answer. The small answer will be we have to emphasize on the importance of smallholder farmers, because the big ag companies already have very high productivity and yields and also profit margin. But the smallholder farmers, they are the very, very bottom of our community and economy worldwide. So I think to combine both social and technological solutions together, we can meet the goal.
Great, thank you, Justin. And let me just, I'll take out a couple of points. There was quite a lot there, and bring you in, Jaleh. You know, you argued in your essay for Disruptive Asia that boosting production alone will not be enough to maintain a healthy population. We also need to increase the availability of nutritious food. According to CSRO here in Australia, close to 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, and a similar number of people are overweight or obese, what we refer to as the double burden of malnutrition. How do you see it? How can we effectively address this immense global challenge?
Well, first, thank you for having me join this panel. It's always a pleasure working with my Aussie friends. Yeah, so you're bringing a very important question. Some 2 billion people, actually. Here's one of the biggest dichotomies that we have. On one hand, we have about 500 million people who are hungry. 265 million people are on the verge of starvation. And yet, on the other hand, we have 2 billion people who are obese, but malnourished. Malnourished in the sense that they have way too many calories, but these are horrible calories, empty calories. So these people who are obese facing chronic diseases that we are all familiar with. So that's part of the reason that when I talk about global food security or food insecurity, if you will, I make sure that we talk in a way that we put equal emphasis on quality and nutrition as quantity and calories. So we just can't give people calories, although when you're on the verge of starvation, it doesn't matter. But once you get past that, you need to make sure that those calories are high intensity nutrients that you're intaking. And for that reason, I think your partnership with Height and Height is very important, because healthy food, or let's call it food for health or food as medicine, functional foods, they are becoming a very core issue in terms of the global food security conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. There's lots to unwrap there as well, and we'll come back to some of those points in a bit more detail later. I want to come to you now, Rob, and staying on this topic, but maybe with more of a regional lens. Despite rapid economic growth over the past 2 decades, Asia remains home to, some predict, as 2/3 of the world's hungry. What do you see? What needs to happen for this statistic to change? How can Asia's progress better deal with poverty?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think as mentioned before, I mean, smallholder farming family units across Asia Pacific are probably most at risk. And yet at the same time, there's a real focus, of course, at the moment on carbohydrate and protein, but it's more about diet and diet mix. And so, I think from our perspective, it's a combination of driving production efficiency and extension of existing good agricultural practice. But it's also about addressing waste. And so you put the three together in terms of focus on diet, healthy, nutritious food, nutrient-dense food, and focusing on varietal selection for those food groups that are able to be grown in a more variable climate system that we're engaging, or that we're sort of running into. But at the same time, looking at waste streams. So if you think about those smallholder family units and what they're producing, making them more resilient is about bringing in technology or embedding technology to make them more efficient, but also to improve their livelihoods.
I want to bring Justin back in now again, and we're talking about just the growing global population as a huge challenge, but also how we, in terms of technology and how we grow our produce. Obviously, as we said, we may reach 10 billion people by 2050. So we're not only faced with the enormous task of feeding the world, but also do that sustainably and without overwhelming the planet. So my question to you really is, how can we increase food production while sustainably, while simultaneously also cut environmental harm that agriculture can cause? And again, where does some of your innovations, how can they help with that challenge?
Okay. Yes, so for the past 30 years, we are already facing this issue: growing population, reducing population in the village, in the agriculture sector, and there's a huge demand of consumers upgrade. So people in the city want to have better food every day, better. And I want organic, I want green food, I want even medicine food. But for the farmers, their tools for hundreds of years never been changed. So the first solution one is we have to, as I said before, include all the farmers around the world, not only the big ag companies, because they can produce enough food, enough calorie, but to meet the sustainability goal for our planet, we have to diversify our food production system. For example, in Australia and US, the farms are huge, and but the crops, they are monocropping. So the issue is when you're producing one food in one city, one province, you are damaging the biosystem. But in places like South America, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and some Africa countries, it's very diversified. In one village, they are producing hundreds of different fruits and vegetables, and the ecosystem there is better, and you can see more bees and butterflies in the villages. But the problem is efficiency. In the past, efficiency and precision are the two sides of the balance. So we have to combine them together using technology. For instance, robots and drones. For instance, if we can use AI to detect the disease and produce prescription map and use fully autonomous machine to spray chemicals, fertilizers, even water irrigation, we can reduce the large amount use of those chemicals in the field, but also producing the same amount of food as the big ag companies can do. But in the past, because of the accessibility and the price of those technologies are too high, so only the big ag companies can purchase autonomous tractors, big airplanes to spray. For the farmers, they couldn't. But nowadays, because of the smartphone, because of all the sensors are now available and are getting cheaper and cheaper, countries like China, India are producing more those robots and drones. And they are available for the smallholder farmers, so they can now access. And also the infrastructure. As we are building 4G network, 5G network, in the future, I believe the robots and the drones can be cheaper and cheaper because they don't need a GPU or CPU on board, because they can use 5G network real-time processing, cloud computing, and the accessibility of those technology will be even easier. And if we can think about in the future, a piece of land in Africa can produce the same amount of food, the same cost for the production, competing with Australia and the USA, the whole trade map of the world will change. And those communities in the villages of India, China, and Africa can have the same competition and competitive advantage as other farmers. And the economy will be very diversified too.
Just a quick follow-up question on that. Obviously, one thing is to make these technologies available and affordable, but another thing is obviously how to use them. So there will need to be quite a big educational component and skill transfer that come with actually rolling out some of these products if they're going to have, impact at scale. So how do you see that unfold?
Okay, yes, we tried that in the past 6 years, trying to convince farmers using the most advanced technology like drones in Chinese village. So that's the biggest challenge for us. The less education group, the very high top level of technology, how we can connect them together. I believe there's a social trend worldwide is people are moving from the village to the cities, especially in the developing countries. And it's a trend you cannot stop. So we believe in the future, who is responsible for the farms? There are very little people who has the willingness to adopt new technology, who has the understanding of business, both business and agriculture, not the existing farmer who only understand the land, but don't understand how the trading network is, what is the economy like. Those people, they are willing to adopt technology, they have some level of education, and as the AI and cloud computing is combining with the modern tools of agriculture, the level of education you need to help them to understand and use this technology will be minimal. So it will be easier and easier to use those technology because it's designed to work with human being, not just a tool who need to learn and understand and train, even need to have license to fly. In the future, I believe it will automatically work with human. And that's our solution as well, and our philosophy of designing our tools as well.
Okay, great. That's something to watch for sure. I want to now turn the conversation to the impact of COVID-19. We can't obviously avoid that question. It's still very much unfolding. And Jaleh, I want to come to you again now. Both in developing and developed world, we've felt to some degree the impact of the pandemic and the resulting social and economic crises, and which has had on access to food and supplies. How is COVID-19 impacting global supply chains in the region? And what's the outlook for a return to pre-pandemic conditions?
Yeah, I think we should talk about this Ides of March vintage 2020, right? Our world was upended. Normalcy was basically upended. And I couldn't imagine a day in America where I would go to a grocery store and would not see all kinds of meats just piled up in the refrigerator boxes. So it was a shock for a lot of us. So what we saw, and if you remember, I talked about a lot of this in the article that I wrote for your volume 4, Disruptive Asia. One of the obvious things, I'm going to go through a number. There are 3 or 4 things that happened, and I think these are going to be emerging trends. They are going to become new trends. Right now they're emerging, but my guess is in a year or 2, these would become permanent features of our life. The first one was we saw the break in supply chains. So, and if you go back to the root of it, decades of globalization and centralization so that you have more efficient and more profitable systems had resulted in these very intense central processing and supply sources. So that we now realize is in an emergency situation like we had a few months ago, we're going to need more distributed food systems. So many governments and nations and states and provinces are beginning to reshore food production. Instead of relying entirely on outsourced and imported food, they want to see their own self-sufficiency improve. Another trend that we saw was because of high unemployment that is going to be with us for a while. I think consumers are now very price conscious. So as we reshore and distribute our supply chains, we've got to think about ways to make sure that we offer healthy food at reasonable prices. So that's a big challenge. Another trend that I'm seeing coming because of the COVID is the health awareness is very high level right now. So we as people, as different demographics, are looking at food as food for health or food as medicine. These are two different things, but they are becoming new trends. So more and more, we want to make sure we have clean food that is locally, regionally grown. And so we know where the source is, we know where the providence is, and that sort of thing. And one other trend that I'm seeing, and everybody's seeing, in a matter of 5 weeks, the world pulled forward 5 years of digitalization, which is, to me, just mind-boggling and astonishing. When you translate it to food and ag, it means e-commerce, it means direct to consumers, it means locally grown, and all kinds of ramification under this thread. And then the big, large, overarching trend that we are seeing because of all this health consciousness and price consciousness and climate change and all of that, the big umbrella over all of this is sustainability. And Justin talked about a little bit about it, and Rob has always talked about it. So sustainability is a huge, it was a trend, it's becoming even bigger. So these are just generalities, new trends that I see would have a hold on us for a while.
Some really great points. Then I'll encourage everyone to go to our website to look at your essay for some more detail. There's some really interesting points. I wanted to take one there and ask you, Rob, around locally grown food and sourcing local food. There's been debates, how the pandemic has led to a sense of protectionism and also tightening of restrictions on international trade. Do you think the crisis currently will lead to a trend in countries looking to self-sustain in supplying their consumers, or is now actually a time to uphold international food supply networks?
Look, I think what this crisis is highlighted is a trend that was already happening. I think this new normal, this is the new normal that we're living in right now. I think that it's not going to go back to the way it was. And I think that's increasingly a realization for the whole value chain as we sort of make this transition. So part of that, I think Jaleh mentioned earlier, this expectation that's being created for consumers about any food, anytime, anywhere, is typically creating huge pressure on supply chains. And when you have pressure points such as we have at the moment, that really then disrupts those supply chains. And then you have to get into mitigation response, such as the IFAM response, which is this international freight assistance mechanism, where the Australian government spent $110 million to essentially charter airplanes because there was no domestic travel. So I think there are probably three key areas of response. So that's reducing cross-border interdependencies and particularly for primary sourcing and intermediates. So think about things like packaging, labels, which would traditionally be produced perhaps in China or in countries with a lower production unit cost, more vertical integration and local sourcing for those to make sure that those parts are available to put products together. I think you think about more investing in local facilities. So we see that through in Australia and with the trend on plant protein towards local sourcing. So Australia Plant Protein at Hulme, our part of the EAT group, investing heavily in locally sourced fava bean protein isolate. Also the likes of V2 Foods, a great example of corporate venturing, but locally sourced or moving towards a locally sourced product that came as a result of a challenge around and putting together technologies with different stakeholders. The second would be about mitigating production and processing risk. So, in particular, intensive animal production systems, we see, the impact of COVID. You don't have to think back only 6 months ago, and it's still a real risk, is around African swine fever. And that has taken out a huge number of pigs, pig production, in particular in China, but around the world. And so having technology that mitigates risk and predictive analytics with companies, young companies like Animal IQ here in Singapore, who are developing some amazing technology in that space. And this automation, which sort of fits to XAG about dirty, dangerous and dull jobs. So it's fast tracking the adoption of drones. I think the drone success story in China and also Japan, we're hoping to replicate that in Southeast Asia. It's a bit more of a disparate business case or a business model. Notwithstanding that, I think service providers are the ones that are going to adopt the technology, not necessarily the smallholder farmer. And so, enabling these service providers, agronomists, cooperative leads, even government extension agencies, arm them with good agricultural practice, arm them with key pieces of technology like drones, like microfinancing is going to be really key. And then the final piece is around efficiency, so driving efficiency in supply chains and trying to find ways to extend shelf life, for instance, in waste. In Singapore, there's lots of talk, and I guess your listeners would know about the 30 by 30 strategy. It's actually been on Singapore's radar as a sovereign risk for many years. And so actually what they're doing now is they're actually enacting the plan. So, they're just dipping into their reserves. They're investing 20 billion. So to put that in context, I think at the GFC, they invested 5 billion. So 4 to 5 times they're investing in pivoting into health and biomed tech, artificial intelligence, climate resilience, and part of that is around food supply systems. So you would have read a lot about vertical farming platforms and development of that technology. I think that still relies heavily on genetics and phenotyping fit for purpose varieties and addressing the power consumption to get return on capital. But it's a diverse food production system in the same way that cellular ag, so shop meats, I think for processed meats in the processed meat sector, it'll be part of the solution. The only other comment I'd say is, in terms of animal production, I don't think it will go anytime soon. And so I think it's a little bit altruistic or to expect that, animals will be totally taken out of the production system. In fact, I think that's really a backward step. What we need is a diverse, resilient, sustainable production system and finding ways to support all forms of, in the case of protein supply, is really, really key.
Thomas, I wanted to add just a commentary following what Rob was talking about logistics and supply chain. I was listening to the CEO and chairman of Unilever the other day on TV, and he was talking about a new model for logistics and supply chain. It's called, he called it just in case, as opposed to what we have right now that is just in time. Yeah. So he said, Unilever and big corporations who are in the middle part of the food, the supply chain, they're thinking about doing things so that it's just in case if I have to do this, just like Rob said, I'm going to bring labeling and packaging right next door in case there is no way I can get them from China or Philippines, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think for CFOs around the world, they'll be looking at their working capital. And if you can find ways to disrupt your supply chain, and we see that with DTC models, direct-to-customer models that are operating now out of necessity. So bypassing wholesalers and distribution centers and going straight to customer. If you can then take that working capital and redesign that into strategic stocks or into differentiated product portfolios, I think that makes a lot of sense. I do think that will be a return to some form of normalcy at the retail side of things. I look at Orchard Road, only just opening up in the last week. Those guys have just been smashed for the last 10 weeks. And so, I think there will be a repositioning though of how consumers have become adjusted to online shopping and how you engage through online, offline platforms.
Thank you, Rob and Jaleh. I wanted to bring, and we started talking this already around investment. Before we go to our live audience, please have your questions ready. Investment into AgTech, and Justin, I'll come to you again. As an entrepreneur and a founder in your own right. What are the opportunities now for investment into addressing the growing need for greater food security, new food supply system? And if you can, obviously with experience living in Australia as well and comparing with China and the region, what are some of the, what is the investor community telling us about investment into AgTech?
Okay. First, I think investment means the expectation of the market and also the society. So whatever happened in the world, big event, it will actually affect and influence the whole investment community. Today in China, you can see there's an increasing of awareness of food safety and food security. Both questions are being around for many, many decades, but recently, because of last year, we had this 4 armyworm attacked from outside China. So the Chinese farmer is returning to the field, fighting with this 4 armyworm and trying to protect our food security. And this story goes very big in China. And then suddenly people start, stocking rice and corns just for safety. And this is one thing. And the other side is the consumers. They want better food. They want transparency and traceabilities. So agriculture is not only agriculture anymore. It's about the whole community and civilization. And so if you want to convince an investor in China saying, okay, I'm going to start a company in the agriculture sector, it's a very hard story to tell. But if you talk about you want to connect different sectors together for the farmers. For example, we provide our farmers with a drone to spray the crops, but not only just spray. This is not a good business because you can only make some money. It's a dirty job. But if you're saying to the investors, saying, okay, what we are trying to do is we are trying to survey the land, and then we know what they are growing, planting, and how big is the farmer's field, and what's the growing status of their crops. And then we help them to make decisions on what chemical to use, what fertilizers to choose. And then we can also provide those information to the supply chain, the buyers of those produce. And also we can provide those information to the banks saying, this individual farmer owns how much, land and what he's growing, what's the expected return of the yield this year. And then we are suddenly connecting the farmer, the land, the crop with consumers, with banks, with government, with the whole community. And this story is much bigger than agriculture itself. So I think today, when you talk about investment in agriculture in China, people are talking about the whole society, not only just the invest in one farm.
Thank you, Justin. We will soon go to some questions from our audience, and I'll going to ask Jesse to rejoin us shortly. But I wanted also to come to you, Jaleh, just talking about investment. Obviously, as a venture capitalist, where do you see the greatest potential in terms of investment into AgTech?
How much time do you have? I think the entire food and ag vertical is highly investable right now, and it became more so after the COVID pandemic. And so, because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to just sort of package it in two pieces. Upstream, which is the farm, the kind of things we do with agriculture on the farm, and then the downstream, which is the food and table and fork. So when you look at the upstream, the umbrella is sustainability. So for that, you're going to see investments in biologics, so you reduce the amount of pesticides or water or whatever input you have. You're going to see a lot of investment in those areas. You're going to see robotics because there's shortage of labor and labor costs. And you're going to see a lot of logistics software, because what we saw is not acceptable. We can't do that. So on the downstream, what we are seeing related to food is functional foods. We want nutritious food. We want touchless, so a lot of e-commerce and robotics for automation of service. You're going to see investment in those areas. And so I would just put these two big umbrellas, sustainability upstream and health and wellness on the downstream. These are, whatever falls under these big categories is highly investable.
Great. Thank you very much, Jaleh. And I'm pleased to hand back to Jesse now for your question. Jesse.
Thank you. And I just want to say I've been so invested in this conversation. It's fascinating, and it's really, in line with what we're trying to do at H&H. I just wanted to, all three of you have made points regarding not only smallholder farming, but how that translates into, the industry and big farm companies, and that's certainly something that's close to home for us. And I wanted to ask, we now understand the importance of organic and everything you were just talking to, Jaleh, and how I wanted to ask how smallholder farmers can meet the rising expectations of a more demanding market, and how those two things are connected. And you've all sort of been touching on it, but there seems to be a little bit of a gap in the smallholder farmer being able to connect with that. So I just wanted to put that question out there.
Oh, this is a great question, because I think when we talk about smallholders, I think you cannot talk about an average typical smallholder internationally. The smallholder in California is an artisanal, or around Melbourne, for example. She or he is an artisanal specialty farmer. In China, or say Thailand, the farmer, or India, it's a subsistent kind of feed my family kind of farmer. So let's talk about the kind of farmers we see in California or in Victoria, the smallholders. So we are actually looking at an investment right now, who is, the founder is a very bright woman, and she is trying to create the biggest farmers market in the world by connecting directly to the small farmers who are producing highly organic, clean, specialty things, and deliver them to homes and restaurants. So this is the kind of, and this is a new model, basically, direct from farm to homes and restaurants. You cut all the middlemen, so the margin for the farmer is higher. They're going to make more profits, and I'm getting my food conveniently, hygienically, and beautifully to my door delivered. So, all kinds of new things are happening. Perhaps Justin can talk about the smallholders in China and Asia because they are different than our smallholders.
Yes, I can add a little bit on that topic, Jaleh. I think in order to make sure the smallholder can be connected to the society and to directly sell their food to the customers, we have to transfer the traditional branding trust to a computer trust, or we call digital trust. What does that means is before, if we want to go buy some organic food, we have to go to a good supermarket like Whole Foods, and then because of we trust Amazon, we trust Whole Foods market, so we can trust that this food is truly organic. But once a farmer wants to directly sell their food to a customer, how the customer can believe this farmer is really using an organic farming method? We have to have this digital farming network or infrastructure to make sure the customer to understand what has happened to the food production. So I think we have to go back all the way to the very beginning of the food production. The farmer has to use some digital tools, or at least you need to have some IoT equipment, Internet of Things in your farmland. So the traceability is based on digital network, based on blockchain technology, not on the branding or not only on the reputation of a single individual smallholder farmer. So this is my point of view.
Yeah, I think just adding to that, you know, our view is possibly a little bit more centrist in terms of mainstreaming technology and innovation. I mean, the definition of innovation is creating something new that adds value. And so whilst many countries have experienced overuse of chemicals, the fact is that modern crop protection chemistry is a key part of a sustainable production system. And anyone who is advocating for no chemicals is actually taking the diversity out of a production system and tools that farmers need to grow a crop sustainably. You know, I think applying technology like XAG technology is a great example of how you can actually apply those chemicals in a much more sustainable way, much more targeted, low volume, and it can also have you know, social impacts. So you're getting those farmers out of a paddy, slogging around, Justin, 4 hours maybe to spray a hectare, say 15 mu, versus a drone that might do it in 15 minutes. Actually, what we saw is tangible, real impacts on grandparents who would otherwise have to do that because their sons or daughters are in the cities and they're looking after the grandkids, and you actually get this reattachment of family units because you know, there's adoption of that sort of technology. So I think I'd be careful about advocating any one shift and throwing out the tools that we need. In the same way, we're not going to take animals out of a sustainable diet or production system, but we need to find ways to make that more resilient.
Right.
Thank you very much, all three of you. We're almost out of time, but I want to bring another question from our audience. And it's kind of a double-barrel question, but it's really around, you know, the role of government in investment into, you know, food security. How do you see, you know, will governments in Asia fast track or maybe even delay rather their food security policies and investment as a result of COVID? And the second part of that question is, how do we, I guess, encourage Asian governments to take on exports of innovation? Maybe I'll start with you, Rob.
Yeah, look, I think, as I said, you know, Singapore has a massive focus through its 30 by 30 and Singapore Food Story strategy. It's tying together, you know, government agencies, Enterprise Singapore through Seeds Capital, who are investing in accelerator programs like GROW. So we're a program partner in the GROW Accelerator here. And that's bringing together and focusing innovation, but challenge the innovation. So my only point there is that innovation for innovation's sake is actually worthless. You actually have to be addressing a particular problem. And if you can do that with a clear business case, then you'll get investors on board. So collaborating with government agencies, building capacity and capability, attracting talent in to share and collaborate with licensing and technology, and getting investors in the capital markets aligned that investment in sustainable food production systems is actually a good bet. It just needs a longer horizon for an earn-out than what you would otherwise perhaps look at, say, in Silicon Valley with digital tech.
Yeah. I want to close on a question, maybe looking more from Australia's, maybe into Asia, and again coming back to the pandemic. And Jaleh, I'll finish with you. And again, an argument you make in your paper for us is that Australia enjoys great brand equity worldwide and in the region, and is known as a source of high quality and trusted food. How do you think Australia's large food export industry to Asia will fare now in a world of this pandemic, but also adapt to the post-pandemic realities?
Yeah, obviously Australian food is sort of gold standard. New Zealand, Australia, US, I mean, obviously you want to maintain that reputation because it commands a premium, which means it's a higher margin kind of business. So you have to do whatever it takes to maintain that level of superior quality. Also, I think what I see with Australia, lots of things that are going positive for it. What I would like to see more of in Australia is the level of innovation is fantastic. You see great entrepreneurs, you're seeing great accelerators, blah, blah. What I don't see is enough risk capital. And in capitalistic systems like US and Australia, we don't expect government to come and tell us what to do and give us money to do this and that. We expect the government to facilitate, not necessarily crowd the risk capital, private capital system. So I would like to see incentives put in place by Australia government to facilitate more risk capital that would be available to entrepreneurs and founders and these great accelerators that you already have. So that's what I would like to see happen. That could be part of a national food and ag strategic plan that could encompass all of this, the premium quality, risk capital incentives, all kinds of things that can go in that. And also, one other aspect that I think many countries need to still start thinking about is to ease regulations in terms of what the new gene editing, the new technology that is coming on board, because we want to fast track these technologies. So I think another role for the government would be to ease regulation to make these technologies move to the market faster.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jaleh. And I think that's a very good place to conclude today's discussion. There's a lot more we could go into, but unfortunately we are out of time. But it's been a very rich discussion on some very important topics, and obviously 45 minutes doesn't give it justice. But I really want to thank you again for your time to share your expertise and your perspectives. And Jaleh joining us from San Francisco today, Rob in Singapore, and Justin in Guangzhou. So it's a truly international panel with unique perspectives. So thank you for that. Also, Jesse Broadway, of course, at H&H Wellness. I don't think we could have asked for a better co-host. And also, thank you for sharing your insights. And to our viewers and listeners for joining us today. If you want to go deeper on some of these topics, do head to our website where you can find all the essays in the sustainability edition of Disruptive Asia. Before we go, I'd like to mention that our next Disruptive Asia live event is on 30th of July, so about a month from now, and we'll be looking at COVID and climate change and the need for a green recovery in Asia. Joining me will be Asia Society Policy Institute non-resident senior fellow and former Australian ambassador for the environment, Patrick Suckling, and head of international programs at Climate Works Australia, Megan Agurio. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and stay connected. Bye for now.